can turn on the other light. Yeah, I'll turn on the
Can
other light.
we? Yeah.
Okay, y'all, as we get going today, basically, I just wanted to go as fast as I can in reviewing stuff. So today is not really going to be like for debating and discussing, but it's really just to make sure that you have the facts on things. So when you go in there, all of y'all are going to have chapter 1, chapter 2, and then varying levels of chapter 3 is really what we're looking at. I'm not going to do anything with ideology, and we'll kind of work through this as we go. So let's just start with terms from chapter 1 for starters. Have y'all got any questions about anything from chapter 1? And I did have a request, I guess, before you do start. Somebody asked what the format. It's going to be 2/3 multiple choice, 1/3 short answer. So I'm thinking it'll probably be 30 or 35 multiple choices. I think it's going to be 5 out of 8 short answers. So you get to pick the 5 that you answer, but you don't have to answer all 8. So, and then the take-home 10 questions for 20 points will be roughly about a fifth of the exam, maybe just a little bit more or a little bit less. So you're going to be looking at maybe about an 80-point exam in class, plus the other 20 for the take-home, and that's basically the format of it. Yes?
If you do all 8, you get extra credit.
No, I actually get very angry. Yeah, I get very angry. It's like, man, she can't count. What? No, seriously, just answer. Pick the 5 best ones. Pick the 5 best ones. What questions have y'all got from any of these terms up here for chapter 1?
For the terms, do you want like specific from the textbook? Or
Well, let's just take a term and let's start identifying them. There's no point in talking about where. Go ahead, Sabra.
Does that underneath the order, does it say buffer zone?
It says buffer zone. Yeah. What do y'all remember about the buffer zone?
35 meters.
Grandma McCullough.
What about Grandma McCullough?
Oh,
Zoom in. Her mouth is full.
Stop.
Yeah, zoom in. Her mouth is full. Go ahead. What do you remember about Grandma McCullough?
Abortion.
Abortion.
Yeah, abortion in the clinic.
Yeah. Well, keep going.
It was like debating whether she should be able to walk the person that's gonna have the abortion, like basically kind of like guilt trip them, but not really, trying to have them take back change, or like trying to convince why, like other options instead of aborting the baby. Or
Yeah, Grandma McCullen was actually the person, if you go back and you look at this, she was the grandmother, and this was in Massachusetts. Do you remember what the policy of the buffer zone was?
you can't go
35 feet. 35 feet.
Okay, they basically, do you remember why they set up that policy?
that shooting.
Because people were like cussing and yelling and throwing
the
things
people
at
going
people.
into
Okay, originally though, do you remember why? Go ahead, Yanira.
It violated the First Amendment.
But why did they originally set it up? Because there was something, go ahead, that happened.
The shooting happened, right?
Yeah, there actually were some pro-life advocates that went in there and actually they killed a couple of the abortion practitioners. And their thought was, if we kill the practitioners, then they cannot perform the abortion, so in the long term, we're saving life. And Massachusetts passed a law, it was a 35-foot buffer zone. So basically, you could not get within 35 feet of an abortion clinic if you were protesting. You had to stay pretty much 35 feet away from the person that was trying to get in there. And if you remember, and Elizabeth, you started to say this, what kinds of stuff did they yell? And this is one of those spots where you can be really, really specific. What kinds of things do you remember that they yelled? I'm sorry? Anybody?
Baby killer? I mean,
Go ahead, Naomi.
Did they like have the recording of like a crying baby?
They had a recording of a crying baby. You're going to hell, they would yell. These kinds of things. And make sure that you go through and you find these things. 77-year-old grandmother, she was protesting the 35-foot buffer zone because if you remember, Grandma McCullen did not yell all of these things, but she was soothing, she was comforting, and she was basically like trying to genuinely talk people out. And it says in here that allegedly she's actually persuaded more than 80 people to not actually go through with the ultimate service by going into the abortion clinic. So with this in mind, her argument was what? Why did she want this thing taken down? Freedom of speech. And think about it. You know, if I'm trying to talk to Sarah, and Sarah's over there by the door, Doesn't it kind of make sense, and I don't know if this is exactly 35 feet, but it's reasonably close, that if I'm yelling and I'm not in a normal tone, that I'm not going to be as effective if, in fact, Grandma McCullen, who wants to just be able to walk up and be able to talk to Sarah as a regular person right up here beside her. And her argument was, you're taking away my free speech. What was the problem with tearing down this buffer zone for Grandma McCullen? Everybody. You're not just opening the door for her, but if you're going to protect freedom of speech, you're going to protect it for her and the people with the crying babies, and the people yelling you're going to go to hell, and the people that were spitting. You remember all of these things kind of came up in the article. What did court ultimately hold? Do you remember?
They sided with her.
They did side with her. And if you scroll down on here, there it is. They did ultimately side with her. This is the second one that's down there. And effectively what they said was that they were burdening free speech when there were other assault type laws that were in place that would protect somebody from having to deal with that conduct by those protesters. They didn't need to limit speech, but that other law would not endanger the person that was attempting to go into the abortion clinic. And if you remember, the thing that's telling is that the Supreme Court has that 250-foot buffer zone around it. So they're saying, no, you can't protest within 250 feet of the Supreme Court because it might impact the administration of justice. But yeah, we can tear down the 35-foot buffer zone. Seems a little bit hypocritical. Take a good look at that article, though. Yes. No, you started to say something, Hannah.
So she won.
She won. Grandma McCullen won. What other questions have you got from chapter 1? And really, you know, the articles are really conducive to short answer questions. So really show me what you know. If you only write 2 or 3 sentences, it's just not going to be enough. What else have you? Go ahead.
Social contract?
What was social contract? Go ahead.
It's the theory, well, if you're, okay, there's a few different ones. There's Thomas Hobbes' social contract, there's Rousseau's, and there's John Locke, but I think we just did Locke.
Just talked about Locke, yeah.
So his social contract was, well, now I don't remember the specifics. I remember more Thomas Hobbes' social contract, which basically said, like...
Don't do that, because we'll confuse people. Go, Lily, quick.
That basically people give up their rights in order for the government to like
protect them,
Yeah, people are going to be willing to give up certain rights and freedoms in order to gain certain protections from the government. That's basically what Locke is saying in this. And I had given you a number of different examples, but the bottom line, if you remember, a really good article for this was the web cameras in cars. You know, a lot of y'all did not like the idea of the web cameras in cars. Why? Because this is a violation of privacy. This is a violation of your property. This is a violation of freedom, you could argue. However, there were a number of you in all the classes that said, wait a minute, if people do drive better and I'm safer, or the people that I care about are safer, then guess what? I would be willing to give this up, full well knowing that I'm going to receive a better protection on the roads because people are going to drive better knowing that they're being watched. How did those cameras work? Do you recall? Go ahead.
They turn on whenever it was like, whenever it senses like obscene, yeah, like bad driving.
When it senses obscene driving, that's a new one. Can you give me the specific term?
Wasn't it when like they were braking too hard?
Yes.
Or, like, touching gas, like they
The
accelerated?
G-forces, when there was a drastic shift in the G-forces, you accelerated too fast, you hit the brakes, you swerved, the cameras would come on. Do you remember how long they would come on? Yeah, they would come on for right in that 20-second range, and they would film what you were doing in the front seat. They would also film what you saw out of the front bumper. And what was the purpose? I mean, some of y'all liked it, some of you didn't. Anything that you can tell me about that?
Wasn't it for insurance?
Eventually, I asked at the end, would you be willing to save money on your insurance if you put this in your car? And those of you that seemingly hated it all of a sudden liked the idea of saving money. So yeah, I thought that was kind of interesting. But anything else you can think of? I mean, go ahead, Luke.
So like it can be addressed if you're a bad driver, your parents can like, I don't know how you
The video will get sent back to your parents, and the fact is that if you were putting on makeup, which we talked about, if you were eating a Big Mac, which we were talking about, if you were doing something to the stereo or your phone, these would be things that they could address that in theory would make you a better driver. What was the positive about these cameras?
They saved you.
people drove, I think it was, 86% better at the end of the first year. So when they compared the number of videos that went home from the beginning of the year to the end, there was an 86% decrease, which means people drove better. But maybe even more basic than that, the article said that, and we talked about this in class, this could catch you doing something wrong, or it could catch you doing something right. This could actually exonerate you. It didn't necessarily have to convict you, kind of a thing. Any other questions that you got from any of the terms? Go ahead.
Referendum.
What was referendum? Referendum, recall, and initiative all kind of go together. So in any order, what was referendum, what was recall, what was initiative? Uh-oh. Go ahead, Alex.
Was it recall when if there was an elected politician or
Yes.
whatever in a particular state, and if I guess the people didn't like him, not like him, but if they thought that he wasn't, I guess if they didn't like him, yeah, they could recall it, and then the whole voting process would start again.
Yeah, Wood, do you remember how that starts? Signatures. If you don't like, say, a governor or a local politician, because there's no federal recall, but it's like with a car. If you have a car that's got a problem, they will recall it if it's on lots of cars, and they'll fix it no charge. Well, a recall election is recalling a bad politician. And you, as the voter, would draft a recall petition, and then you would collect signatures from registered voters. Normally, maybe 3-5%, something like that. Once you do this, and then once the Board of Elections verifies these signatures, then at that point, they are going to have a special election, and there's 2 basic questions on there. Do you remember what the 2 questions were? Go ahead, come here.
Just kind of asking, yes or no, would you do a re-election, and then if you do say yes, you have to pick, who you want to do.
Yeah. Do you want to recall or remove Governor blank or office holder blank from office? If no, you're done. You don't have to do anything because you just want them to stay. However, if you say yes, then you've got to pick the person that's going to replace them. And do you remember the election that I gave you as the example? California with Schwarzenegger. Schwarzenegger replaced Gray Davis in a recall election. Do you remember some of the people that ran for office?
The prostitute.
Gary Coleman.
Gary Coleman, the porn star. Which porn star? Mary Carey Cook was the porn star. Gary Coleman, Arnold Schwarzenegger, somebody who may or may not have been Richard Simmons. Angeline, the exotic dancer. I mean, it just goes on and on. And we had done this really too with the idea of direct democracy. And if you remember, the question that I asked you was, should anybody be able to vote? Should anybody be able to run for office? And everybody's like, oh yeah. And then I started talking about porn stars getting elected. And y'all are like, I don't know if I want that person representing my state. So all of a sudden you didn't like direct democracy as much when California did it. The original question that Rolando had was referendum. Do you remember what referendum was? Lily, did you want to say or you want to hear?
Both.
Both. Okay, so do you want to say?
Yeah, I think is the process of it being put onto the ballot that's the referendum.
Who actually does that?
I don't know.
Who actually puts it on the ballot?
Initiative?
Well, the referendum one.
The citizens?
Not the citizens. Remember I had asked the question and it was totally unfair. If 50% of the people are in favor and 50% of the people are against, which side would you pick? And you really don't know because it's half and half. But the idea is whichever side you pick, you're going to piss off basically half the voters, which on the wrong issue could cost the election. Some issues get too hot, and instead of having to pick between 50 and 50, the legislators, the state legislators will actually pass a referendum so that they're not voting yes or no, but they're voting so that it goes on the ballot so the people can vote yes or no. And you remember how I went through that? If it passes, I can come back and say, hey, we did this together. If it doesn't pass, I can come back and say, hey, we did this together. If it fails, I can come back and say, hey, we did this together, but I'm here to help you. If it does well, I can come back and say, hey, we did this together. I'm here for... In other words, no matter what happens, the politician is not going to get blamed in a referendum. So that was recall referendum. What was initiative? Go ahead.
That's when, like, if you want something to become a law, then you have to go around and get signatures, and it has to be signed into law, like,